Now, coming to tonight's session, we have a great speaker with us tonight, a trusted strategy advisor to C-level executives. Nivedita has a stellar track record of leading cross-functional teams to execute innovative products. Prior to Citrix, she has led global product management teams in Fortune 500 companies and also venture-backed startups. Besides, she has a master's degree in engineering and an MBA from the United States. And her professional career has spanned international assignments across Europe, Asia, and America. Nivedita, it's a pleasure to host you. We are very, very honored, and thank you so much for your time that you kept aside for us. Welcome, and handing over the session to you.
Can you let me know, Menaka, if you can see?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. So let me put it in
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And I want to take this time to really go through something which is very interesting to me, and it's great an opportunity to share with everybody. So design thinking process and how to make design thinking the core part of your product innovation. And then we will talk about specifically the world of SaaS applications, the world that all of us are moving towards in the enterprise as well as in the mobile space. So let's first start with, I think everybody knows about Steve Jobs' philosophy on design. And as you see all the Apple products, you've seen this quite often, and he was very clear that it's not about just what it looks and feels, it is how it works. And it's all about creating empathy and emotion with the customer so that when they pick up something, they feel that they are really owning that product. They are enjoying it. They're experiencing a certain kind of a bliss in a certain way. So it's very important to understand what that means when you design or develop a product. So we'll go over the whole design thinking process. I'll take you through some very well-known companies and examples of things that they have done. And then I'll take you through my own journey. I also want to say that when you do this, it's not that you're going to get it right all the time. There are some failures, and one needs to even go through the process to see where something within the process may not have worked. So I will kind of bring up some of those examples also. And of course, if everybody is not aware, IDEO is one of the largest design houses in the world. And Tim Brown, who is the executive chairman, he talks about design being the human-centered approach to innovation. It is all about integrating people, technology, and that's what makes it so beautiful in terms of building a product. So it's very important to get started from these very like-minded design thinking folks before we get into the real process. So what is the process? So process is a process. However, it's how you implement the process that becomes very important. So like I first said, that the process has 5 legs or pillars. You empathize, then you define, you iterate, you prototype, and you test. This philosophy in a certain way is more kind of robust in putting together something that talks about users first. We've done it, it's just that this is much more well-defined process that helps us in getting to really answering the problem that the customer has in this case. So let's start with empathy. So what does empathy really mean? Empathy is all about how much you listen to your customers. It is at the core of all of this. Like I said, as you can see here, customer is the center. Listen to them, that's where you start from. And then you live their life. You actually watch or walk with them. In case of Intuit, they really live end-to-end life of the customer from the time they come to the store, how they open the store, how they run the cash register. So living the life of the customer or the customer journey is extremely important. Asking open-ended questions, and you're collaborating because you want to be living their life, watching them, finding details, every minute detail, so you're collaborating with them. And then you want to get insights of every little piece of how they're using an Excel sheet, or how they're looking at some mobile app that they use, or is there enough of technology in their world that they want to use. So understanding and empathizing with the customer is very, very important. So listen to everything that they have to say. So here are some examples of empathizing. Again, like I said, it's all about the emotion. What do people like, what they love, and what do they need? So let's start with probably a product that all of us know, revere, is there, especially when the iPhone came out in 2007. That was the period where Sony, Ericsson, and Nokia's were the devices in everybody's hand. And Sony was successfully able to bridge their music Walkman into the mobile devices. And of course, Apple thought the best way of, instead of having an iPod as well as a mobile device, why not incorporate both together? And they actually were thinking not of a phone, but working with Motorola to have iTunes onto a Motorola device. Unfortunately, that whole experience was a disaster. And since they'd already heard about what the customers wanted, they came up with this concept of, there is this 1.5 billion subscribers, and this whole attempt with Motorola did not work. However, let's look at building something, and that was where the iPhone originated. In case of Airbnb, they started talking to the customers, and they realized that the customers were actually fed up with this cookie cutter experiences that hotels were giving. It was impersonalized, it was bland, and it did not really energize and provide the empathy that the customers wanted. So again, empathy, emotions become extremely important as you're talking. So when you listen to the customer, you want to understand through the open-ended questions, what is it that brings out the emotion? The next part of this is, once you've got all this data and you want to collect as much data as possible, you need to come to something which is very, very critical, and that is, what really is the problem? So you want to define the problem. So you want to analyze all the data, you want to extract trends and themes, you want to focus on some specific needs that are coming up. So it's very important at this point to define the problem statement, or at least come up with what we call point of view. So what is the point of view that you're getting from all this data? So let's look at some very founder, Jan himself. And as he said, in his example of problem statement, there were two aspects to it. iPhone was launched, and he found that every time he went to the gym, he was missing calls. And so he wanted some kind of a notification or some kind of a status update. In addition to that, prior to that, if everybody knows his story, he had moved from Ukraine. And at that point, he was living in the Bay Area. His father was in Ukraine, and communication had been a challenge. So now putting both of these needs, where for him communicating with his father at a very expensive way was extremely important. At the same time, with iPhone being launched and not having the features that he wanted, he found a super big problem to solve this problem with WhatsApp. You can read his more stories in the link that is below, and you can see how he came about coming up with this. So now once you have a problem, it's also very important to understand what you're going to build with that problem. So before you start getting into really finding a solution, what you want to do is ideate. And when I mean ideate, come up with as many ideas as possible and go really wide. Find lots and lots of solutions for the problem. However, the aspects of this, first is creating the customer journey, how the customer starts and how the customer ends. Those should be the two outcomes that one should get out of once one gets the problem. The aspect of persona. Who is the consumer of the solution that you're going to build? So it's very important to understand who the user is, what kind of lifestyle they have. Is it a baby boomer? Is it a Gen Z? Is it a millennial? Do they have devices? How many devices they use? What kind of they're leading, users basically from morning to the end, how they use, how they're dealing with on that for who they use. It becomes extremely important that you come up with multiple ideas, because the more volume you get, there's more variety, and you can use this variety to really play around with. You want to experiment, you want to get curious. This is the point where you're inventing. So the more amount of brainstorming you can do at this point, it is better, because the volume that's going to give you good solutions. So when you get to ideation stage, it's very important to do a brainstorming session. It's a very, very collaborative process. Also, let me step back. As we go into the empathize stage, or as we are defining, when we are talking to customers in the empathize stage, I want to encourage all of you to think about it. It's not just a product manager's job. It is the organization's job. Because as we build products, marketing is involved, sales is involved, engineering is involved, finance is involved. So it's very important that everybody in the organization listens to what the customer has to say, and then they feel that they are a part of this whole definition of the product. So when you're also doing the ideation workshop, make it a collaborative process, make it a process where you get cross-functional teams involved, so that everybody also knows what's happening. The other aspect is sometimes when we don't involve product marketing or finance, and when you go with them, when you have the product ready, sometimes they're not sure what's going on. So it becomes like you're almost recreating the whole journey and the whole story. Rather than that, when you bring them on board right away, they're already part of that storyboarding that you're doing. And so it's much more easier to get them on board with every step of the process or every approval that you need. So when you're doing this brainstorming, again, there are set some rules. It's very important at this point. You want to get the best ideas. So every idea is good. There's not a bad idea. So say yes to all ideas. However, the one who is leading this brainstorming, you need to make sure that we are focused on the problem, because when we get to brainstorming, we've got such amazing ideas that it goes all over. So be focused and stay on the problem. Be visual. Try to write out things, draw things. That makes it much more easier for everybody to understand what's going on and participate in. And nothing like drawing on a whiteboard or just cutting papers and building something. It makes it a lot more easier. So then once you've done your brainstorming session, at one point you need to start narrowing it down, because that's when you're getting to the process of what is the outcome and what do we need to start solving. Because you need to have a couple of options whereby you can build prototype. You cannot have lots of options and build a lot of prototypes. You need to figure out which ones are actually closest to what you're trying to solve. So let's look at an example of Airbnb. So Airbnb, when they did this whole, their whole design thinking concept, actually they got many, many ideas. And some of the ideas were related to accommodation. How do you personalize for a user? How do you make it a memorable experience? And how does it all translate with travel? Now, with all these information that they got, actually, what they did was, it's not that they solved all the problem on day one. However, it became the bigger part of their Airbnb platform, which is really what they're selling today, along with the entire service and gig economy, everything that they're providing. So once you start this whole design thinking and ideation process, you will find you're actually also defining things that will fall into your roadmap. So be open to that and be focused. Don't be in a hurry to add everything on the first release. So I talked about after ideation, coming to prototype. So prototype is finding a quick, some kind of a product or a solution that matches the problem that you're trying to solve. So I am going to give you two examples. One example is, a lot of you definitely may not have heard it. and that is a Palm Pilot that was a precursor to every iPhone that we have. It was one of the earlier days handheld computing device. And this is in 2001, 2002, when the first .com started happening. And this was one of the biggest products that came out. And Jeff Hawkins and Donna Dubinsky, who were the founders of this company, actually started off with just building a wooden piece of plank, which you can see over here, a prototype. And they're just written down and formatted how the product would look. Eventually, the product started looking like this, and Trio was one of their most successful products. And there were other companies, not just Palm, HP and Compaq, and a lot of other companies at that time started building this similar product in this handheld computing device. So the reason I bring this up is I wanted to show you that prototyping has always been an integral part of this whole solution. And even before design thinking, when Donna Dubinsky and Jeff Hawkins built this, they actually got funded based on this prototype to initially start getting the seed funding and building this product. So prototyping in an inexpensive way is a very, very critical part of any product that we do. It just gives everybody a visual aspect, and it helps in understanding and even helps in defining the problem in a better way. Of course, everybody has heard of Dropbox. And so if you go Google and in Dropbox and actually Google Drew Houston and the MVP and the prototype, you will see a video where Drew is actually taking you through a whole process on a Windows device on how to sync and share files. Again, the story over here is Drew was going for a meeting and he was taking a bus, which is a long ride. And in that bus ride, he realized that he had left his USB stick, and he was wondering, why is it that I need a USB stick in order to get my files wherever I am? I should have it on my computer. And that's what led him to build Dropbox. So again, it was a very simple prototype that he created, and he shows very clearly, and it's on a Windows device, it's not even on a Mac, on how he can sync without using FTP. And that was what was happening those days. So again, two simple prototypes that have made maximum impact on the users. Some prototypes from my life that I wanted to build out. So I worked on dual screen Android smartphone. This was one of the early ones way before Samsung released their own. And here you can see these are the ways we used to prototype. The first one here is absolutely hand-drawn. We were just trying to play around how the two screens would be looking. And this is when the iPhone was just launched. So this is the concept that we had, that we would be merging two screens together. And this is exactly how we were playing around with the UX and UI, just black and white drawings, where you can see what would happen if the user were to use the camera app and have two apps open side by side, a camera app and a messaging app. So this was very early prototyping that I had done with my team, and it was very, very successful. Again, there was a lot of these prototypes actually helped us define the OS structure, the framework for the entire device. And also we tested it with users and customers in order to understand if they could understand, or they saw the same gestures and flows just like we had anticipated. So wireframe is very, very good way, or just hand-drawn wireframes are a good way of just testing the product. So next big thing after prototyping is, after all, who are you making this product for your customers? So you need to test and validate. So again, like you can see over here at the core of it, there is your customer, and you need to go validate with the customer. And validation helps a lot of alterations and redefining. And it makes sure that you solve the problem. And at the end of the day, we are here to do a business, grow our business. So it's not just about solving the problem. Are you going to generate revenue? So as an example, so when we were doing the dual screen phone, we had a gesture that was that required that the parent and the child interact in a very different way than when we were pinching the screen and then moving it forward. Actually, when we tested it, we found that customers were having a lot of trouble with pinching and expanding it. In fact, one of our customers actually during that test gave us a much more easier method whereby they said, why don't we expand it from the top bar? And we made that change and it was a lot successful. So these are, when you go and test your prototypes, you get really good feedback. And in fact, those feedbacks that we got, we really changed the way we structured our OS for the dual screen smartphone. So testing is very, very critical because you get immediate feedback and you actually get a much better refinement of your product than what you had thought. Again, it's an iterative process. The best thing about testing is you get feedback fast, you fail fast. There have been many products in my life that I have failed because we did not take the product to the right customer base, or maybe we did not listen to the customers well. So again, as a PM, you want to fail fast because you need to get a product that is solving a problem and that is going to generate revenue. So testing a prototype and failing fast is very, very critical because it's a very inexpensive way of failing and getting validation. And when you're testing, it's not just a concept, you're testing every aspect of it, how the device works, where the button should be, test the wireframes, flows, interaction. And as more and more we have millennials and Gen Z coming into the workplace, the mobile first is even more apparent and important these days. And most of the younger generation is going to get to the workflow using the mobile device. So developing something and keeping in mind that the mobile device is really important is something to keep thinking about. So let's look at some other examples of products that have been tested. So as I was talking very early on, we started with the Apple iPhone in 2007. So before iPhone, the smartphones that we had were Blackberries and Nokia, and they actually had ugly keyboard in them. They were trying to squeeze a keyboard that sits on your laptop into this mobile device, which sits in your palm. And that experience was really, really something that we all remember was not really anyway as close and as smooth to what we have today with the Apple devices or the smartphone devices of today's generation. Now, of course, that was the best we knew. However, when Apple started designing, they needed to make the device simple, easy. However, in terms of making it simple and easy, since folks were still very used to having the jockey stick sitting on the keyboard for the mobile devices, they removed all the entire keyboard. However, they did keep the home screen, if you remember. And the whole point over there was to have tactile accessibility. And people were used to that, customers, so they wanted to keep that emotion going. The second big thing was those days, if you remember, I think only Nokia had this right. Any other device, especially BlackBerry, if you needed to mute your sound and ringtones, you had to go into the screen and find the settings and go and reduce it. And this is where Apple actually stuck around with what Nokia did, and that was just have a minimizing button, and that would really reduce, make it much more easier, especially when you're in a meeting, to just go and minimize it rather than having to go through multiple layers of screens before you get to minimizing the sound. So these were some important experiences or empathy and testing that Apple had done. In my own example, so at Citrix, we build a mobile email app, and we've had this for quite some time. And our users are enterprise users. However, every enterprise user is also a consumer, and they had two different calendar apps on their phone. One was residing in our app, and one was their general personal calendar. And there were times where they would have meetings that were parallel on both calendars, and they were unable to kind of get it across, and sometimes they miss meetings, for example, a dental appointment or just to pick up their kid from school. And so our customers actually, on talking to them, they said they would have a single possibility of having a single calendar which is showing on their work calendar, and that way they would have parallel commitments showing up on a single calendar. So that's what we built in, listening to the customer and just allowing them accessing their multiple personal email accounts. We were able to overlay both their personal information with their corporate information. And that experience has been amazing. So we tested this, we did a prototype. So again, we went through this whole journey, and we've got this examples over here. So now that I talked to you about all these products that are there in our world, I really wanted to get to something that I have done end to end. And that is, we're in the process of making changes at Citrix, and we know digital transformation is coming. So as part of one of my journeys within Citrix was to understand what is happening in terms of digital transformation. This is really massive when you think about it. So talking to over 200 customers, really listening to them, empathizing with them, and understanding the various journeys of our customers, I was able to come down and create a point of view from digital transformation. It came to future of work. And really what I saw is the new trend of gig economy. And just for anybody, if you're not aware, Uber drivers, the ones who are putting their Airbnb or Ojha rooms, the ones who are today having apps such as Thumbtacks and working, or call center workers, or even transcribers. They're all gig economies. However, since I'm in the knowledge workers domain, for me, the call center worker, the transcriber, they are my customers or potential customers that I want to identify. So I identified that the gig economy is coming. I found a problem and I came up with a point of view. However, it's very important when you come with a point of view, does it have a huge TAM? Is it a big addressable market? And is there potential for me to really go and make something massive? So it's very important to also understand it's not just a problem. Sometimes you will do these smaller problems, which are more feature functional related when you're doing design, as in working with the UX team. Over here, since we're talking about innovation and SaaS application, you really need to understand what is the span or breadth of influence you're going to have on the TAM. So I started from empathizing with what's happening in digital transformation with my customers, who all had lots of asks and lots of different direction. However, I came down to the gig economy. So the next part of it is, of course, once we've got the POV, we've defined what the POV is, we came to what is the customer journey, what's the persona, and how do you go about now really getting into building some prototypes or coming up with ideation. So here is what I did. I created user profiles, user journeys, and personas. It was very important in my case, who was the user persona. These were either stay-at-home mom or part-time retired individuals, or these were folks who were running 4 or 5 different contracting jobs. So that was my persona. They could be sitting anywhere in the world as long as they had a laptop and they had an internet connection. And the age did not matter. The device did not matter, because I was looking at, were they using browsers? And the point I got is all of them were using browsers, and they were very comfortable using browsers. So that was how I created a persona of these folks. Again, even amongst these personas, I did find that somebody was a millennial, somebody who was a Gen Z, or they were far more adept at using multiple devices and various kinds of devices, or they used more of a Mac device, whereas somebody who was a baby boomer, they were using more of a Windows device. So there was these, even within the personas, I could further break down the personas. Then there was a supervisor then there was a non-supervisor. So in every business, for example, if I went into retail, the supervisor worked in a different way, whereas if I was in a factory floor, the supervisor worked in a different way. However, they were doing similar kinds of jobs wherein they had work that was for a shift. So I looked at various personas. It was very important to understand each of their personas, because I wasn't sure at this point whether the problem that I had or the point of view I had created was in a position to give me a single solution. And as I'm doing this, I need to understand emotions. It's very important how folks work. So emotions are very important. And you want to, like I said, as we went through this, I did have my colleagues, stakeholders involved in it, because I wanted to bring everybody on board right from the start of the ideation process. Just some help tools for all of you in case you're trying to create profiles and personas and you want to do it quickly. These are certain YoungGov is a site where you can go and see lots of profiles are there, and you can start figuring out how to create your persona. SurveyMonkey is a great tool, whether you want to create personas, whether you want to ideate, you want to test something. So it's a great tool to have a quick, and especially for 100 users, because that's the free subscription that you get. You can get quick validation or quick answers to a lot of problems. I'd highly encourage you to use these tools. Again, as I walk through all these ideation, I and my team, we had lots of prototypes. I'm sharing some of them with you. Here, this was totally hand-drawn, that we were trying to understand how the various pieces of the hardware and the software would fall. This is a prototype where I was looking at how does somebody's home equipment look like, and what does that mean for somebody who's going to be contract working from home. Then this is something we just started putting, what if I put in a couple of mobile apps together? How would that work together on a user's device? This device could be a MacBook, a Chromebook, or a Windows browser-based device. So we looked at various options and we started testing all of these. And the test was given to folks on the field with our sales team so that they could go and talk to the customers. I used, every time I met customers, I would show this. So prototyping and validation is extremely important. So come up with many ideas and then share them with your customers to get feedback. And there were a lot of tweaking done. Customers said, oh, they wanted only a single app. Some customers said, well, I don't mind having a hardware along with the software. So there was many flavors that we got. So actually it helped me define, can I actually have 2 or 3 different SKUs to build this solution and maybe have more, a larger marketplace and a larger ability to make a bigger TAM out of this, a SAM out of this. So it was very insightful as we started building these prototypes and talking to the customers. Like I said before, think mobile first. So as you're testing, here are some of the options of how you want to test. First is usability testing. You go talk to your customers, give them the prototype, and walk through them with the features flow interaction. You can also use usertesting.com, and very quickly you get some feedback on the user testing. Another way of testing is actually, though you bring your stakeholders in the finance team, you do bring your stakeholders from your finance team. I would suggest also the ones who are in finance or marketing who were not a part of your team, go test with them, because indirectly they are your stakeholders too. Do cart sort, that's another approach as you're trying to look at the information navigation, because it's very important to know from one screen to the other screen how the user is going to go, how the user is going to work with their product. So it's important to go play with it. Optimal Workshop gives you some options. Again, another tool that you want to do. And last one, for everybody, we do it in engineering. You should do it over here also, A/B testing. Give the user 2 options and choices. And you will find actually, it's not just about choices. Sometimes you'll find they have suggestions that putting a feature of something onto of a B onto A, and they are actually explaining to you how better you can make it. I did have some stories about it. For now, I'll leave it with this, however, but I would highly encourage using these tools to definitely start using testability. You will find, and you can do testing, though this is design thinking process, you can also do testing for features as you're building quickly, just to make sure that you've got everything in the right flow interaction that you want to get and solving the right problem. So as we come closer to this whole session, I want to make sure that everybody understands that while I went through the whole process of design thinking and sharing with you examples from Airbnb and Apple and even Palm Pilot, I also took you through my journey of how I'm using. Now, this is where most of us are working today. We're in an enterprise space. So what's happening today in enterprise, we got to think about it. As millennials, Gen Zs, or even Gen X that has been there, are using consumer grade products on their app store, the expectation for enterprise products is also to be a consumer grade. And therefore, using this process that I said really enhances a consumer-based approach to even enterprise applications, which are consumer facing or user facing. And so now that you have this, as we get into SaaS application and we've got into safe and agile practices, in agile practices, you are defining 2-week sprints, you're putting in your features and functionalities in 2 weeks. So this, as you get into this process, testing a feature, a functionality before it gets into this process is extremely critical. So when you groom your process, groom your product with your team, and as you are building it and breaking it into your 2-week sprints, you should be testing your features, functionalities on a regular basis. And so design thinking becomes extremely important as you get into the agile process, because before you get into the sprints, you should have validated, you should have tested, you should have had a prototype also, and you should have gotten a feedback whereby based on that feedback, you will make changes. For example, there was a time where I got a feedback regarding something about certification-based authentication from one of my customers who wanted the app to open with a Touch ID. However, when I tested it, the way we had designed it, it was not what the customer wanted. So I had to hold it back for a sprint. And by the time we came to the third sprint for that cycle, I had already validated it enough where the customer had given us enough input with various testing and validation on how better that flow and interaction would be, and we were able to put it. So it was a much better experience, because when you're talking about security on a mobile app, that whole experience can be quite clunky. So because now you're in an agile process, once you've tested, you've validated, you can pull in or push out depending on where you are. So that's the beauty of design thinking and beauty of bringing it together with SaaS application. So I would like to share this last screen with you, which is more about how we can use it for design thinking, and close it with this very important quote from Frank Lloyd Wright. For some of you, if you don't know, he was a very famous architect, and design and architect actually go together. It's a very similar process. And when you're doing design thinking and when you're solving a problem, like I said, while you do want to go wide, you do want to also be narrow and solve the problem. So less is more, and only when more is too much. So you don't want to be going too wide. So it's a fine line. So you need to think about what's the minimum viable that you're going to deliver for solving the customer's problem. Thank you very much, and I really appreciate this opportunity.
Nivedita, thank you so much for such a wonderful session. We have already received such great feedbacks. Anyways, we will go. Can we go in for some of the questions now? And to the attendees, there is a feedback form shared in the chat window. Please have a look, and there is a poll that we are doing right now. Nivedita, could we go for some questions? In the Q&A window, we have received 9 questions.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
So the first one I have is, what are the skills needed for design thinking and how to build career in it? Skills needed, if you're, first of all, you need to know the process. So there are various design schools like Stanford or Haas in Berkeley that teach you this whole process. It's a 1-week session course, I think. However, ideally, just like you sat through what I did, go read about it. There are some links that I can share. Go through those links. It is just a PM, somebody with a UX UI background that is using design thinking. Actually, you don't need any skills. What you really need is an open mind and wanting to learn this process and wanting to implement and learn from it. When I mean is ideate, fail fast, and change. So it's anybody can have a career in design thinking. How do we make a prototype if we have limited view of our customer, but we do have a problem statement? Like I said, prototyping, if you even if you have a limited view, you have the problem statement. Even if you have a limited view, based on the limited view, build something and go back to the customer base. When you go back to the customer base, you want to make sure that you are getting that product validated. The other point is, I sent you some sites that user testing. Those are meant for limited view customers. So even if you don't have enough customers through those sites, you will get more customers. And that's the whole point of sending those links, so that you can build prototype and test it. Try to at least get about 100, more than 100, 150 customer feedback. So the user testing is a good place to do it. And therefore, I would highly encourage that you go about using that site. So you should get enough insights from the customer. How do we start our research based on limited examples? I really don't understand this question. What do you mean by limited examples? If you, main point is, you want to figure out in the space that you are, if you're trying to build a new product, go with an open-ended question. For example, I want to build a competitor to Oyo, okay? Because what I read and hear, Oyo's experience has been really bad. They did not hear about customers. I've heard stories about folks not getting rooms. So if I were to go and start with, this is what I hear, I would just probably just say, how's your experience with Oyo, and what do you think needs to change? Just have an open-ended question and let the customers talk. And that should give you enough data to come with a point of view. Can design thinking process be used in service industry? Absolutely. In fact, customer success teams today that are supporting service industries are using it, because in service industry, it's even more to understand, am I giving you the right kind of service? So first, understand what service you're trying to do, because a service is also a product at the end of the day. So what kind of service you're trying to do, and then talk to them, again, ask more questions in terms of what kind of service you want to give, what are the challenges that you're seeing, how could we make it better? So absolutely, you can use it in service industry. How should we prioritize the features which should go in first prototype? How should you, so based on the problem and ideation that you have, your team together should build some ideas. And there are many brainstorming tools in terms of how to prototype. In the link that I gave you, the card sort is one option of prioritizing. Then you have just basically getting the team to vote on the top 5, 1 to 5. So there are various ways of prototype prioritizing whereby you can go ahead and prioritize. Recently, I also read about this matrix. I think it's called Spandax or Snap, which is a good way of prioritizing. I'll send the link once I find it to Manika, and everybody can start using that also. The query is on a big picture. How do we build and think beyond the existing software solutions to create a new theme overall in software? Today's problems take forever, but I'm trying to learn and build on the paths of the FANG. I don't understand what FANGs is. If somebody can explain that, I'll go to the next question. People want human-centric output, but without human inputs. How to fix this problem? Well, I don't have a solution for that. You need to talk to humans. Without that, how can you solve a problem, fix human-centric problems without talking to a human? So I think the whole premise of design thinking is that you talk to your user base and you get input. So you cannot fix problems if you don't talk to humans. The design thinking process varies for B2B enterprise and B2C consumer. Well, the process doesn't change for enterprise versus consumer. However, again, there are some places where the process may not work in enterprise. For example, if you were doing a full-on enterprise back-end network hauling, over there, you would have to really, your customer base would be a CIO most likely, or somebody that's dealing with IT infrastructure. You still would need to talk to them to understand what's happening. Are they looking for a pipe where the latency is faster? Or is there a way that they want to upload everything to a cloud in a much faster way? So again, you will need to go and talk to the user or the consumer of those networking equipment. But in some of those cases, it's kind of difficult. However, one definitely does need to always talk to a customer to understand what they want, because without a customer validation, again, you do not listen to the problem and you will not be able to sell the product. If it's an engineering led, you're never going to have, it's harder to find customers to pay for it. So it's always important to talk to a customer. What are the scenarios where design thinking may not be useful or not to use? I just gave you that. How much is the method of design sprints applied in Indian companies? I would not know that. And all I can say is that I think what I understand today, most of the companies, even in India, at least everybody that has a shop in India, from the US or anywhere else, everybody's using, I think, agile process and sprint planning. So I don't see that there should be any challenges of using design thinking in companies back in India also. Will our IT culture support design thinking mindset? That is for you to think. You can be the change. You can go ahead and start pushing it within your organization as a product lead. How do you find the right persona for a B2B product? Of course, this is not a SaaS product. Persona is for you to define. Once you talk to your customer base, you know, for example, why personas are two kinds in my business. The CIO or the VP of IT purchases the product, so they are the decision maker. However, all the tools that we build, they are used by the employees of the company who happens to also be a consumer of some sort. So that is my personas. Now I can keep digging further down. So you need to dig down further, who's making a buying decision, who's making a usability decision, and from there you can start figuring out what the right persona is. How do you validate after ideation when customers are not sure which is the best, or these are the vested interest who wants to put their solution? Do A/B testing, give them just two options. That should narrow it down for you. Is it feasibility? How do we support customers to ideate design? Customer is not aware of what he wants. How do we support customer idea? Well, that's where you lead the customer in thinking, in defining what you want through prototype. That's why prototyping is so important. People want human-centric, but without human input, the process differ from lean principle. Any specific tools for design thinking at various stages? I've given those tools in my slides, so you should go ahead and look at it. Is the process of human element in a problem or need to be considered in each and every stage of design thinking? That's a good question. Is empathizing in the process of human element considered in every stage? Of course, it's considered in every stage. Like I gave you the Apple solution. Because folks were going to come out of a QWERTY keyboard, it was very important for Apple that they want to make it simple, yet not that simple, give folks that impression of they still had something to touch and have a tactile impact. And that's why they had the home button. So that's why it is very important to understand the empathy, because when you buy any product, it's all about how you're feeling, how excited you are. Like I said, the difference that Airbnb and Ojha has, Ojha did not do enough customer research. That's why Ojha has so much of problems. Whereas Airbnb, there was actually a time where Airbnb also had a situation where somebody went and took a hotel, took a room as a hotel, and then would not leave. In fact, they decided to just stake the claim in that room. And again, those were challenges that Airbnb had to go and make changes in the way their whole process of who has a right to stay in that place, and who, how much rights are there for the owner of that home or that room. So some processes were changed. So SLAs were changed again based on design thinking. So whereas Ojha today has not heard of anything about the customer and is still continuing on that path. So so empathy is very important at every point in the design thinking process. So I'm going to take one or two more.
Sure.
Because as we're getting close.
Yes. And also, I request you to pick the best question.
Oh, okay. Okay, let me. Is design thinking a linear process? It's better to follow the path. So let me give you an example. So when I did my gig economy, that was a big point of view. Within the gig economy, that I got a problem, and I've got a lot of ideations that came out of that. Now, did I go and check with the customer all the time on the problem? No, because the problem was already there. But the linear process came back from the ideation to prototype and testing. That path has to be linear. So because I'd already had defined a problem, and from the problem, I'd ideated 3 or 4 solutions, and I got a validation of the top 3 or 4. So every time each of the solutions I was further implementing, I would go back and do the process. So design thinking is linear. At the same time, depending on where you are, if you have a big problem and you have a couple of solutions to solve the problem, you can just do the ideation, prototype, and testing. How does coexist with emerging innovation paradigms, such as working directly with lead users and crowdsourcing? At the end of the day, they are all working quite parallelly. The difference that design thinking is doing versus lead users and crowdsourcing is you are just first is you are getting more input. The more input you get, the better point of view you can make. That's number one. So there's nothing wrong in getting more user input. The second aspect of it is if you've got more users, you can go and validate your prototype across many more users. So the aspect that brings out the best about design thinking is it's following this linear path of ideate, prototype, and test. You need to make sure, doesn't matter whatever you're using tool, that you're following this path. And you need to make sure that when you're doing that, does it really go back to the main problem that you've identified? So you could be using any other tools. However, this path of validation, building a prototype, ideate, build a prototype, and validate, and then make sure that it circles back to the problem, that is what is very important. So we're at the time, and that was the last question I'm going to take. So I really appreciate everybody for staying with me and really listening to me. It's been my pleasure, and it's been very exciting for me. So since I was asked to nominate the best question, I think I'm going to give the question to Nikhil Reddy when he asked me about emotions and empathizing across all stages.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Nikhil, congratulations. We'll be in touch with you with your gift. So I think we have come to the close of the session. Nivedita, thank you so much for such an enlightening webinar. We have received some amazing comments. I will pass them on to you, and we hope to work with you again sometime.
Sure, I look forward to working with you guys. It's been my pleasure. Again, I appreciate everybody being on this forum, spending time with me, and feel free to share. I will send you an updated version of my slides as a PDF. Feel free, go use those tools. And if you have any questions, reach out to Manika and I can help you with that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Attendees, we will be sharing with you the webinar recording and the PDF version of Nivedita's slides. And we hope to see you on our next webinar and the other upcoming events. I'll speak to you soon. Thank you so much.